What's up YouTube, and welcome to part 2 of the Edsel restoration series. If you haven't checked out part 1, make sure you go and do that. I'll link it down in the description. But in part 1 we went over purchasing the car, did a quick walk around and checked out the condition of the underbody, the body, the interior, the motor, and then we started working on the teletouch transmission and got that shifting again. We also pulled out all 8 spark plugs and filled the cylinders with an ATF acetone mixture to try to help unstick everything. And in this video we're going to see if we can't break the motor free. Alright, so while this list is not necessarily in order of importance, I do want to try to check every single one of these off before we actually try to fire up the motor. So first and most important, we're going to try to break the motor free, get it spinning over by hand and make sure that everything moves smoothly. Next up, I want to pull the valve covers and inspect the valve train. We're going to flush the coolant system, so that includes both the engine block and the radiator. Next, we're going to replace the spark plugs. That's pretty much a given. We're gonna prime the oil system, so before it actually runs on its own, I want to get the oil pump pumping and get oil to the entire engine. We're gonna change the engine oil and filter. That one is also a given because the oil and filter in this car is over 56 years old. We're gonna hook up an external fuel supply. So when we first fire the motor up, I don't want to be running off of the stock gas tank and all of those old lines. So we're gonna start with an external fuel tank that is supplying the carburetor. And then if that all runs smoothly, then we can spend the time and money to go through the fuel system and make sure that is clean and ready to go. Lastly, we're gonna clean the carburetor. So I've got myself a 15/16 socket and a breaker bar. And this is something that I've wanted to do since I bought this car, but I was trying not to rush things and take the proper measures to prepare myself for the best possible outcome. The thing that I'm gonna start with is getting rid of those fan belts so that I can spin the fan freely and it's not in my way while I'm working. Just to make this a little bit easier, I think I'm going to try and get the fan pulled off as well. Are we lucky enough to have the same size? Of course not. That's going to work a lot nicer. Alright, there's the fan coming out. Alright, and here we got a little bit more leverage. And we are turning the bolt, we are not spinning the pulley, so that is not a good sign. Alright, so that outcome of trying to turn the crank pulley was not what I really wanted. So the next thing I'm going to do is pull this valve cover off because this will help give us a little bit better idea of the internal quality of the motor. So I'm going to start by spraying these spark plug wires down with WD-40 so that I'll be able to get them out of this clip. And then I'm going to make sure that I take a picture of their location just so that I know I can get them back into the correct holes. Oh, that came out. That started super easily. Oh my gosh, these are loose. All right, well, that doesn't look terrible. It's oily, so that is a really good sign. Of course, we would not want to see rust. All right, everyone, well, that motor is a lot more stuck than I was hoping. A little discouraging, but it is just the beginning, so I better get used to it. So let's go ahead and mix up our special concoction and let us work its magic a little bit longer. So it has been 24 hours since we last put that mixture in to the cylinders, and I did some more research last night and I came across a few videos that showed leaving tension on the crank pulley. So what we have here is our breaker bar with a piece of tubing coming off of it so that I can hang a battery out of the fender and keep tension on the crank pulley while that mixture of acetone and ATF soaks in. So if we pull the dipstick out, you can see signs of ATF and acetone in that oil. It was completely dark and black before. So that means that our mixture is leaking through some of the cylinders, probably not all of them, but it is making its way through, and that is a really good sign. I still really want to try and break the motor free with the motor completely together, but I'm almost certain at this point that if I want to finish building this car and be able to drive it how I want to drive it and feel all 345 horsepower out of it, I am probably going to dive into a complete rebuild and pull the heads off and at least do an inspection of the cylinder walls. So let's start by getting some more access onto that crank pulley and see what we have to work with. All right, so first order of business is going to be taking this radiator out. I'd like to also take the hood off, but I don't think I can handle that by myself. Let's start by pulling out the upper and lower rad hoses, and then it looks like we have a trans cooler that goes into the bottom of the radiator, and then probably just 4 9/16 bolts. Well, by accident, we just ripped the hose. It was probably gonna need to be replaced anyways, but I was gonna try to save it. All right, so we got the radiator hose, the lower radiator hose connection off that goes into the water pump, and I was trying to break the connection from the hose that goes into the radiator, but it looks like the tube coming off of the radiator is flexing itself and is getting close to breaking. And I want to avoid that. It actually looks like it may already be cracked, and it looks kind of like it's been repaired in the past, but it's kind of hard to see. So I'm going to leave that hose on there and we'll pull it out with the radiator and then inspect it further when we get it out. So next up, I'm going to take the trans cooler lines off. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but the fitting has broken loose inside of the radiator, but it has taken the whole line with it. I guess I should vacuum some of that shit up first before I light it on fire. We also have electrical wires going through there, so that kind of sucks. Let's hop over and try working on the other side, and I want to try that because that one appears to have been leaking for a while, so maybe that will help us by being pre-lubricated. I can't tell. It looks, something happened, but I think it might have just broken. Yeah, it just broke. All right, so here's my idea. We'll see if we can get you a view on this. But if you look at the crank pulley, you can see there's this plate that separates all the pulleys, and it has holes drilled in it. So I took a piece of cardboard and traced out the radius of that pulley so this would fit over it. And there wasn't much room, so I just took a pen apart and stuck it onto my pick, and then I could go in there and roughly get 2 hole locations. So now we have a template. I'm gonna cut this out of probably 1/8 inch steel or whatever I have. We'll drill these 2 holes in it. I'll measure the holes that are on that plate on the pulley, and then we will find some round stock or a dowel or something to put in there, weld from the backside, put a handle on it, and then we should have a wrench that will fit on that pulley. Alright, so I don't have any round stock that fits these holes. What I measured on the car is just about 0.3 of an inch. I do have this all thread that's fairly close. It's a little thin, so I don't know if I'll be able to, but I'm going to try just turning it down the lathe really quick. Alright, and what we're left with is just about 10/1000ths of an inch under 0.3. So that would be pretty good because I want it to not be extremely tight. So we'll cut this in half, we'll cut this off, cut this in half, and then weld it into our plate. Alright, here's what we're left with. We got that welded all the way around, probably a lot more than we needed to, and then I filled up the back side of both pins, so hopefully we can set it on there now, and we got a good wrench to rock it back and forth. Alright, it's on. So while it is working, I did not realize that that plate that we are now holding into will turn by itself. So I'll show you guys real quick, but it looks like we might be back to square one. See that turning? That sucks. Alright, so I got that tool that we made rigged up so that it's keeping tension on it. I just got a ratchet strap going to the frame. And I was thinking it wouldn't be a bad idea to drain the oil, since we're going to do that anyways, and just get a good view of what's inside of that oil pan. Alright, I know the camera doesn't have a nose, but I started getting a little concerned because it's really watery, and I was just sitting here debating if that is really the acetone and ATF, but it does look pretty red, so that was promising. But dead giveaway, everyone knows the smell of acetone, it'll burn your nose, and that is definitely acetone in there. So what that means is the acetone and ATF is making its way somewhat through some of the cylinders, maybe just one of the cylinders, maybe half of one of the cylinders, but it is making it through. So I think that is a good sign to let it keep working, keep tension on the motor, and let the time work its magic. All right, it's about the end of the day and I'm about done working. I just put the battery back on our crank extension so that I can sit overnight and keep the weight on it. I didn't get to video it because my camera was dead, but I had the great idea of putting one of these chain clamps onto the pulley. I figured I could get that super tight and maybe hang some more weight off the end of that overnight. Now I have a bunch of pieces of what used to be the pulley, so that's unfortunate. The clamp, I should have thought about that, but the chain was forcing out on the V-groove inside of the pulley, and it ended up cracking about half of the side off. So I will now be in the market for a crank pulley, but I think I got a while until I have to worry about that. All right guys, so here's the plan. We're gonna use PV Blaster, we're gonna soak it for at least a day or two, and then we're gonna weld a bar onto the power steering pulley that's attached to the crankshaft and see if we can't get it to spin over after a day or so. So let's get at it. All right, it's now been a few days with the battery still hanging off of the crank pulley. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna finish taking the radiator out. The reason I didn't finish that is because we still have that one transcooler line that hasn't broken, and I wanted to try something I've seen online a lot. So we're gonna do our best not to break that connection. Okay, so what we're gonna try is, I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen this online, but we're gonna try using crayons after we heat it up to melt in and break the connection between the line and the nut. And this is supposed to work because the wax in the crayon doesn't melt and evaporate like penetrating oil does. Penetrating oil just burns off and evaporates, and you have nothing left to get into that joint. So crayon, supposedly, once you heat that nut up, the wax melts into there and actually stays a liquid long enough to break that connection up. Yeah, that's still just spinning the line, so that's unfortunate. We broke the edge of the pulley off. All right, this bucket is filled with metal shaving. It's pretty close to 100 pounds. So let's see what this will do. Unfortunately, I think that's the end of these attempts because there is the rest of our pulley. Alright, so I had some buddies over drinking a beer and I figured it'd be a good idea to take advantage of them being there and help get the hood off of the Edsel so it'd be easier to access the engine as I move forward. Alright, so it has now been about a week since we last worked on the Edsel and we've really been letting that penetrant oil soak into the cylinders, trying to break the corrosion to get the motor to spin. But unfortunately, I just got back to the shop to find that it's just about in the same condition as we started. But even if it did start spinning at this point, I don't think I'd be comfortable going forward with getting it to run and be reliable. So today we're going to start the process of pulling this motor out, getting it on a stand, and we'll do a complete tear down and kind of replace seals need to be replaced, hone the cylinder walls, go through the whole process. So I have personally never pulled a motor this big out of a car this old, so this is going to be an interesting process. I started with taking a lot of different pictures of different angles of the car just so that when I'm going to put stuff back together and I'm holding a random vacuum line, I can pull up those pictures and try to see where it goes. We'll see what happens, but I think I'm going to try to pull the motor and the trans together. Kind of nice to get them both out at the same time so I can really go through the engine bay and the undercarriage and clean up that area with a lot more access. Alright, so to start, I think we got these big old heater core lines that go into the heater core for the blower motor. I think I'm going to start by taking those off and get a little bit more room in there. Alright, I think next up we've got this, I'm assuming vacuum line that goes into the intake. So we'll start there, get that guy off. There's that. Alright, where to next? Maybe we'll do the throttle linkage here. Looks like another good thing to work on. Man, everything is just so old. That cotter pin for the throttle linkage just busted right off. When I can, like this cotter pin, I like putting everything back in the same spot, so when I'm going to put it back together, I can just pull it out, don't have to worry about finding it. Obviously on this one I'm going to have to replace it, but it'll just help when I go to find a new size. So we got that guy off. Next, let's see here, what do we want to do? And now up under the car, we've got two bolts up in here that hold the trans to that cross member, and then also we have this cable going into the trans here, which I'm assuming is a speed sensor. So we're gonna go ahead and get those two out and then kind of take a look around everything and see what else is required down here. I think that the exhaust is going to be okay as is because it rusted off and broke off right at the where the two pipes come together from either side of the motor. So I think we'll be able to pull it off without doing anything with the exhaust. There might be fluid behind this, I'm assuming. Yeah, so that's just that's cool. So it's literally just a plastic gear and a cable to spin the speedometer, I'm assuming. Now we can try to tackle these bolts down here. Alright, I just want to show you guys this. I think it's kind of interesting. I heard a lot about the Edsels being inconsistent on the assembly line, and these two bolts that came out of the transmission crossmember are different, which is kind of funny. The first one is a flanged hex bolt. The second one is just a regular hex bolt with a lock washer on it, so I think that's kind of weird. Alright, and I think next up, still underneath the car, we've got the alternator right here. And I think it'd be a good idea to get these wires off of it. I just took a picture of where the wires are at. So now we'll just take the bolts off and pull the terminals off of the bolts on the alternator. Alright, so with that wire harness off, that alternator should be able to come right out with the motor. Alright, so we're also going to have to pull the drive shaft out. With that, since this is a slip yoke that goes into the trans, we're also going to have fluid behind it, which brings up the next thing to do, and it's to drain the trans of fluid. There's no drain plug on this trans, so I'm not sure how I want to go about that. I really don't want to pull the whole pan off. I think the dipstick tube looks like it can double as a drain. Got it. Alright, we're back with the car on the ground, and the next thing I'm going to do is take off this power steering reservoir, and hopefully I can get away with just setting it off to the side and pulling the car or the motor up around it. Alright, so I ended up just taking the whole power steering pump out because I felt like it was going to be in the way and I didn't want to deal with it. Next up, on the passenger side of the motor, we have our fuel line coming in. So we're going to get that. Then we have a ground wire that goes down to the block, so we'll get that too. Alright, so we got off there. That is just how old and brittle this stuff is. That's the fuel line. All right, so I got my cherry picker out. I slid it up to the car, and I can't find a place that I like to hook a chain up to it. I was trying to leave the motor as complete as possible, but I think what I'm just gonna do is pop the carb off so that I can make a quick plate that bolts into where the carb was with a eyelet on it, and then we can use that to pull it out. Obviously you can buy this online, but I just made this up real quick. It's got 4 holes and a little plate for an eyelet, and this will sit right onto where the carburetor mounts, like that, and then we can bolt it down. And honestly, it seems a little sketchy to me. It's a lot of weight on those 4 little 5/16 bolts, but everyone online says that this can, they trust a lift plate with just about everything. And I looked up the actual specs on these size bolts, and each one should be able to lift well over 800 pounds. So I don't think we'll have a problem at all. All right, so as you can see, the motor was not budging, and I think I made a pretty silly mistake. What I thought was just a slip-in motor mount, I think actually has a bolt on the back side. So if I get my light up in there, you can see right up under that motor mount is a nut, and I think it's just a stud that sticks through the bottom. So we're gonna take the nut off on either side and then try that again. All right, and surprisingly, these motor mounts turned out to be one of the hardest parts about this job. They were just super tight and on a really weird angle where I couldn't really get a good pull on. So I thought you guys would enjoy watching a super fast time lapse of me struggling with what should be a pretty simple job. But eventually we got them, and next up we can start pulling the motor. right, so the only way I could reach this motor is on the 900-pound setting on this cherry picker, and so I think we were way overloaded for what that setting was meant to do, and the motor kept wanting to go off to one side and pick the whole one side of the cherry picker up, so I was really worried that it was just going to flip and drop everything. So luckily Jenna was home. She ran out to the shop and helped me hold the motor still while we backed it out of the car and safely onto the ground. All right, that is going to wrap it up for part 2 of the Edsel restoration series. In part 3, we'll get the transmission, pull off the motor, get it up on a stand, and start tearing it down so we can see what the inside of it looks like after sitting for 56 years. If you liked the video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me out a lot. And let me know in the comments what you want to see in the next video or what you thought about this video. I really look forward to hearing all the comments and questions you guys have. In the last video, I learned a lot from a lot of people that know more about this car than I do, so it was really interesting. But thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next video.